Hello and welcome back to Quiet RC. As usual, I am Rob, and if you recall in the last video, I told you that we were going to take that TA02 Racing Special Chassis kit out onto the track. And we'll be going over that in the next video.
See, I did say that.
So let's go ahead and get started talking about that TA02 on the track. Well, that's embarrassing. That's better. Shh.
So yeah, let's get into the actual running of this TA02 Special Racing Chassis at the track. I also have this one here, which I believe I alluded to a little bit in the previous video, and what it is, it was another chassis that I got in a lot that had a couple of these TA02 chassis. A couple of them had the FRP chassis on them, and a couple other hop-up options that were already on them. But what I did with this one is I got one of those TA02 carbon chassis off of, I think it might have been eBay, or maybe I got it through RC Mart, but I want to say the brand was Extra Speed or something along those lines. I can't even remember now. I don't actually have any footage of me opening it. But what it included was a bottom and a top plate and the shock towers. Now, the issue with that is that it's only really useful if you are replacing an already existing chassis conversion. Now, the reason that is that the chassis conversion kit not only comes with the plates and the shock towers, it also comes with very specific hardware to complete the conversion. Probably the most specific thing is the bracket for the front shock tower. That's a very specific piece of folded metal. There's also some other, flanged washers and flanged tubes and obviously screws and nuts and step screws and things like that that allow you to complete the conversion. But really, it's also the J tree, which is all the plastic parts that help you do that. So while it looks a lot less expensive on there, by the time you're getting all the other things, at this point, you're probably just better off finding either a carbon fiber or even an FRP chassis conversion set, new in box, or maybe even a roller chassis or a slider chassis already that exists. But I had that, so I wanted to give it a try, and to be fair to whatever company I used, it was decent pieces of carbon fiber, so that's what I used for this one. Now I had to go through a few extra steps to get it kind of where I wanted it to be, and the setup that I was doing was called the Usgt class. Now, those of you that are watching the US may be familiar with that class. Those of you that are maybe in other parts unknown may not be familiar with it. So just for the sake of everybody, I'll explain what the Usgt spec class is. Specifically, you have a 21.5 zero timing Usgt motor that you have to use, and it's a specific motor, closed end bell, so on and so forth. You also have spec Usgt, I believe they're belted tires with just a very minor tread pattern on them, and obviously there's some weight and specific bodies that you have to use. Now, the idea of the Usgt class, I think specifically, was to kind of combat what was going on with the touring class, which was now kind of using bodies that don't look like any real cars anymore. They're very specifically designed for aero, so they don't really look like any kind of existing cars. So this Cadillac body from Protoform fits into that Usgt class, but there are other bodies that are out there that are not officially licensed but are close to that kind of fit the Usgt class, though some of those even are getting a little bit away from actual cars that exist. Moving on though. So that's what I did with this one. And then I also decided to use the Yeah Racing dampers. So that was kind of the main switch that I was doing. So it was the chassis and the dampers, upgrading those dampers. The Yeah Racing dampers come with a bunch of kind of extra parts to help you fit it to various chassis. However, because the bottom part of the shock shafts, the actual like ball cup that would be on the end of them, goes in between goes in the middle of that lower A-arm in back specifically, you have to have a very specific size kind of tube that goes in there. However, because the included lower, I guess you call them ball cups, whatever you want to call them, with the racing dampers are a little bit larger. You have to use their ball, but their ball is a little bit too big. So I ended up having to cut it down to fit in there. And then once I got it to fit in there, I decided to switch over to hex hardware. Now it's actually a 15 millimeter screw that goes through that lower A-arm, but I only had 16. So I just took one of my millimeter drill bits and just made that hole just a little bit deeper in there so it could go all the way through and fit that 16 millimeter hex hardware upgrade that I'm doing. Now, I didn't go in around the whole chassis and upgrade all of the Phillips head to hex, though I was replacing enough parts that probably about 75% of the screws just kind of were replaced by default with hex hardware. And then anytime I need to kind of do some maintenance or fix something, I'll just swap any type of JIS Phillips head for the hex hardware. Unfortunately, I don't have a ton of footage of me converting over this already existing chassis to the new carbon fiber chassis, but it is very similar to the build with the Tamiya chassis, so you can check out that previous video as you saw in the opening. This is a part 2. The build itself is very similar to just the regular Tamiya brand carbon chassis conversion kit. However, I did decide to grind a little bit of the mounting location for the servo mount so that flathead would actually not be proud of the bottom of the chassis, so it's nice and smooth along the bottom of the chassis. Again, that chassis that I got as a roller had the converted all the J parts and everything like that, so I was able to just swap those over, including the steering linkage and the bell cranks for it. And those still had the 850 size bushings in it. I keep a bunch of bearings on hand now, so I was able to just throw the 850 size bearings in there to kind of keep that nice and smooth. Throughout this whole thing, added shims here and there just to get rid of as much of the slop as I could. A lot of the Tamiya stuff has slop in it, especially like TA02s and so on and so forth, but getting familiar with how to shim stuff up is going to be your friend. And here I'm just replacing that top deck, again, using flathead hex hardware to replace that original or the conversion JIS Phillips head screws so that it looks much easier to work on. Similar to the touring car one, the Usgt I did put onto my setup station to kind of get everything to kind of my base startup, which is 1 degree of camber, both front and rear. Out front, 1 degree of toe out. The rear is set camber from just the arms on there, and now I can't remember exactly what they're set at, but can't change it anyway, so that's what it is. As I mentioned with building this, it was very difficult to get the steering linkage to give you your proper toe out short enough, because the ball ends that they provide, you get one very short ball end and one a little bit longer. And as you can see here, when you shorten it all the way down, there's barely anything left for you to actually grab onto to kind of shorten that turnbuckle. I did not, with the Usgt chassis, switch out the ball cup so you have just the short ball cup on each side of that turnbuckle, but that's what you really need to do to get those a little bit toe out. The last thing I did with this one is I did add 7mm wheel hexes to get a little bit more of that front and rear track out there, because these are fairly narrow chassis, again, as mentioned in the previous video. So the wheels do kind of hide way underneath the body here, because my more modern chassis, like my Yokomo MS 1.0, of which there's a build video somewhere here you can click on, will have a wider track, especially out front. Now, I don't have any footage of the Usgt version running because I actually didn't run it very much, but we'll get into the footage and kind of the performance of the 25.5 version of the TA02 chassis here. Now, here's a couple shots of it right before I put out on the track. Wanted to kind of record it for posterity to see where it was before I really went and messed it up. Which I managed not to do too bad because it's not terribly fast, but we'll get into that. Right away though, I believe I mentioned this in the build video, the blue front knuckles that come with the kit, when I was installing them, one of them, the kind of hole where you put in that ball end, did split right away. Taking it out on the track, the other one split almost right away. And then beyond that, one relatively minor hit actually broke that knuckle up front. As mentioned, I did have a couple of these extra sliders. One of them had aluminum hubs included with it, so I actually just switched those over to this. Because I really do believe that because these plastic parts haven't been manufactured in a long time, that they may have just been sitting in a bag somewhere in, you know, a warehouse whose heat wasn't really regulated and just weakened the plastic, and now it's just a little too brittle to be trusted. So maybe that's an aluminum upgrade that I would recommend out front. Now when that blue knuckle broke, it also kind of allowed the whole axle to get loose enough and allowed that outdrive to actually pop out of the front. But thankfully I found it on the track. I farted on the track? I said I found it on the track. Found it? Okay. Good luck closed captioning. And was able to put it back in. Now, after running it for a while, one of the concerns I had was how warm the motor was going to get, because I have this kind of geared as hot as you can go. It is a 25 pinion. It is a 66 tooth spur, which is their smallest spur and the largest pinion you can fit on there. But as you can see, the motor itself only got up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, the correct measurement of temperature. And with that, it really tells you that you could go a lot hotter, but again, you can't fit any other gearing into this, at least in its stock form. I haven't really looked around to see if somebody is creating some sort of gear case or option to cut it open where you can fit different gearing, but I don't know if I'll actually ever go down that route. Now around the track, it actually handled really well. You don't have to let up too much, but certainly on our kind of tight, medium grip carpet track, it actually handled really well, and you're able to kind of maintain the speed and very controlled. Again, because I did some shimming and it got all of that slop out that I could, it was really predictable to drive. Now, the person driving here is not me. I'm doing the camera work. I have my buddy Lou at the track, who we've officially dubbed as my official B-roll driver, or kind of the Stig for this channel.
Some say.
Now, if you compare it to a modern 25.5 touring car, I believe, again, this is Lou's car. I can't remember if he's driving his X-Ray X4, the 25, the 2025 version, or if he's driving his Yokomo MS 1.0 in this clip here, but
enhance.
Either way, modern touring car, you can see the difference, especially on that back stretch. Now, the issue here is that no matter what the gearing is I'm doing it here, I think the internal gearing of the Tamiya, the TA02 here, is like 3.2, 3 point something. Whereas the internal gear ratio of both my Yokomo and I think the X-Ray are both 1.9. So kind of no matter how you gear it, you kind of can't get that speed. You'll see in the backstretch here, it is just, I'm full throttle or loose full throttle here the whole way, and that's kind of as fast as it goes. I'm going to try to kind of match up both of these cars on the back straight just so you can see how much difference there is. And then we'll go to, you know, kind of the more technical part of the course, and you can see that the difference there is a lot less. Obviously, the modern one's going to be a little bit quicker, but you really feel it on that backstretch. You're just kind of waiting forever for the TA02 to get down that back stretch. Now, I'm not sure where I kind of go from here. I think that the ultimate question that I have is, can you make it competitive? And the real answer is kind of no, because that internal gearing, the restriction on the spur and pinion that you can run, kind of make it so you can never get it to that actual speed. Maybe if I dropped a much hotter motor in it, obviously that would bring it out of spec for the class, but maybe down the line I'll just try and get commiserate lap times with it, but having to do a lot of kind of changing of the actual electrics, which would again bring it out of kind of the spec of the class. That being said, one of the things that Lou said was it's kind of therapeutic to drive it because It's not bonkers fast. It's not trying to spin out at every chance it has or flip or anything like that. It's just very smooth and controlled. So it was actually a lot of fun to drive from that regard, but ultimately the answer is, can it be competitive? Probably not. However, love driving it, still love my TA02s. You will see more builds of TA02s coming up. I really do hope you guys like touring cars because I just have a lot of touring cars, vintage touring cars to build. That being said, please remember to like and subscribe. We have many more videos coming up. I have videos on cars that I've built, that I have footage of, that I just haven't gotten around to actually recording and editing because that takes a long time. Anyways, that's all I've got for you right now. We'll talk RC again later. Thank you so much for tuning in.